The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting the city of New York in shades of orange and purple. The skyline was a jagged silhouette against the glowing sky, and the streets buzzed with the usual evening activity. People hurried home, grabbed dinner with friends, and moved through the routines of their lives, unaware that everything was about to change. In a small apartment on the Upper West Side, Detective Michael Mick Carter was nursing a glass of whiskey, staring at the television screen without really seeing it. The news was a blur of politics, sports, and the usual reports of crime and disaster. Mick had seen it all in his years on the force, and nothing surprised him anymore. He was a man hardened by the streets, with eyes that held the weight of too many unsolved cases and too many nightmares. But tonight something caught his attention. The news anchor's tone shifted, growing more urgent, and the screen cut to a breaking news banner. "Reports are coming in from multiple cities across the globe," the anchor said, her voice trembling slightly. "Strange phenomena are being observed: lights in the sky, unexplained power outages, and what some are describing as unidentified flying objects." Mick frowned, setting down his glass. UFO sightings were nothing new, but the seriousness in the anchor's voice told him this was different. He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. The screen flashed with images from around the world: a glowing orb hovering over the Eiffel Tower, strange triangular craft darting above Tokyo, and a massive blackout plunging Los Angeles into darkness. The footage was grainy and shaky, but the fear in the voices of those filming was unmistakable. As Mick watched, the anchor continued, "Authorities are urging the public to remain calm and stay indoors as they investigate these incidents. The president is expected to address the nation shortly." Mick's phone buzzed on the table, pulling him out of his daze. It was his partner, Detective Sarah Delgado. "You watching this?" she asked, her voice tense. "Yeah," Mick replied, his mind racing. "What the hell is going on?" "I don't know, but the chief wants us downtown ASAP. Something big is happening, Mick. It's all over the city. People are panicking." Mick grabbed his coat and was out the door in minutes, weaving through the crowded streets towards the precinct. As he moved, he noticed something eerie. The usual hum of the city was subdued, as if the very air was holding its breath. People were gathered around storefronts, staring up at the sky or glued to their phones, murmuring in hushed, anxious tones. When Mick arrived at the precinct, it was a hive of activity. Officers were fielding calls, dispatchers were overwhelmed, and the mood was one of barely contained chaos. Sarah met him at the entrance, her expression grim. "They've called in everyone," she said, handing him a folder filled with reports. "There's been a surge in 911 calls: strange lights, missing persons, even reports of creatures attacking people." "Creatures?" Mick echoed, flipping through the reports. "What kind of creatures?" "That's the thing," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "The descriptions are all over the place. Some people are saying they saw tall, thin beings with glowing eyes. Others are talking about monstrous things with claws. It doesn't make any sense." Mick's instincts, honed over years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, told him this was no ordinary night. "Where do we start?" he asked, slipping the folder into his jacket. "Chief wants us at Central Park," Sarah replied, already moving towards the door. "There's something going down there: reports of explosions, people disappearing. It's a mess." The ride to Central Park was tense, the streets unusually quiet for a city that never slept. The closer they got, the more Mick felt a sense of dread settling over him. When they finally arrived, the park was a scene of chaos. Emergency vehicles were everywhere, their lights flashing, and officers were struggling to keep civilians back. The air was thick with the smell of burning and something else, something metallic and acrid that stung the nostrils. Mick and Sarah pushed through the throngs of people, making their way towards a group of officers who were cording off an area near the park center. The ground was scorched and several trees had been uprooted, their roots twisted and blackened. In the middle of the destruction was a massive crater, and inside it lay something that made Mick's blood run cold. It was a craft, sleek and angular, with a surface that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, not even in the wildest science fiction movies, and it was definitely not of this world. "Jesus," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "Is that?" "Yeah," Mick said, unable to tear his eyes away. "It is." As they approached the craft, they were stopped by a man in a black suit who flashed a badge identifying him as with the Department of Homeland Security. "This area is off limits," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We're taking over the investigation." Mick was about to protest when he noticed something moving in the shadows near the crater. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, with skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. It was watching them, its eyes large and black unblinking. "Sarah," Mick said quietly, nodding towards the figure. She followed his gaze, and her hand instinctively moved towards her weapon, but before she could draw it, the figure moved so fast it was a blur and disappeared into the night. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yeah," Mick replied, his heart pounding. "And I don't think we're the only ones." The man from Homeland Security stepped forward, his face a mask of calm professionalism. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "This area is under federal jurisdiction now. We're handling it." Mick wanted to argue, to demand answers, but he knew it was futile. Whatever was happening, it was far beyond the scope of the NYPD. As they walked away from the scene, Mick couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The air crackled with tension, and the city felt like it was teetering on the edge of something terrible. Later that night, as Mick sat alone in his apartment, he watched the president address the nation. The speech was calm and reassuring, filled with talk of investigations and cooperation with international partners. But Mick knew better. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the officers, the way the man from Homeland Security had brushed them off. The truth was, no one knew what was happening, and that was more terrifying than anything else. As the president spoke, Mick's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Turn on the scanner. Mick grabbed the police scanner from his desk and tuned in, his blood running cold as he listened to the frantic voices of officers reporting in from across the city. There were more sightings, strange lights, creatures, and worse, people going missing without a trace. Mick knew then that this was no isolated incident. It was an invasion, silent and insidious, creeping into the cracks of society. The aliens had come, and they were already among them. The fight for survival had begun, and Mick realized with a sinking feeling that they were unprepared for what was coming. As the scanner continued to crackle with reports of chaos, Mick poured himself another glass of whiskey. He had faced many battles in his life, but this one was different. This time, the enemy was beyond anything he could have imagined. And they were just getting started. The following days were a blur of confusion, panic, and rapidly escalating fear. Reports of strange phenomena poured in from around the world, each one more alarming than the last. Cities plunged into darkness, entire towns were abandoned overnight, and governments struggled to maintain control as the public demanded answers. In New York, the situation was deteriorating fast. The lights in Central Park's crater had spread, seeping into the surrounding areas like a malignant force. People who ventured too close to the epicenter spoke of hallucinations, strange sounds, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The military had cordoned off the area, but the sense of unease was spreading through the city like wildfire. Detective Mick Carter and his partner, Sarah Delgado, had barely slept. Their days were spent chasing down leads, trying to make sense of the bizarre and terrifying events unfolding around them. But every time they thought they were getting closer to answers, the situation would shift, becoming even more incomprehensible. On the morning of the fifth day, Mick and Sarah were called into an emergency meeting at City Hall. The mayor, flanked by senior officials and military officers, addressed the room with a grim expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "we are facing an unprecedented crisis. The incidents in Central Park are just the beginning. We've confirmed sightings of similar phenomena in multiple cities worldwide. This is not a natural disaster, nor is it an isolated incident. We are under attack." The room fell into a stunned silence as the mayor's words sank in. "How are we supposed to fight something we don't understand?" asked one of the officers, his voice tinged with frustration. A military official stepped forward, his expression steely. "Our intelligence suggests that the entities responsible for these attacks are using advanced technology far beyond anything we've encountered. We've established a task force to coordinate a global response, but our options are limited. Conventional weapons have had little to no effect." "What do we know about them?" Mick asked, cutting through the murmurs of concern. "What are we dealing with?" The official hesitated, then pulled up a series of images on a screen. They showed grainy, night vision footage of strange humanoid figures moving through the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly. Others depicted massive, mechanical constructs that looked like something out of a nightmare, angular and spiked, with limbs that seemed to shift and change shape as they moved. "We've identified at least two types of entities," the official explained. The first are what we believe to be their infantry humanoid, highly agile, and equipped with some form of energy-based weaponry. The second are larger, mechanical constructs, possibly drones or autonomous vehicles. They appear to be capable of altering their shape, making them difficult to track or target. The ground beneath them was a smooth, glassy surface, as if the earth itself had been melted and reshaped by some immense force. At the center of the crater stood the obelisk, towering and inscrutable, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the device Mick held. "This is a doctor," Walker said, her voice barely audible over the hum of energy that filled the air. "We need to activate the device now." Mick nodded, setting the device down and connecting it to the portable generator. As he flipped the switch, the device began to glow brighter, the symbols pulsing in time with the rhythm of the field. "Come on," he muttered, watching as the device's glow intensified. "Work, damn it." For a moment, nothing happened. The oppressive weight of the psionic field pressed down on them, the hum of energy growing louder and more disorienting. But then, with a sudden surge of power, the device emitted a high-pitched whine, and the symbols on its surface began to shift and rearrange themselves. The effect was immediate. The air around them seemed to ripple and distort, as if reality itself was being torn apart. The hum of the psionic field wavered, then began to fade, replaced by a deep, resonant pulse that echoed through the crater. "It's working, Doctor," Walker exclaimed, her eyes wide with amazement. "The field is destabilizing." Mick could feel the pressure in his mind easing, the disorientation lifting. But even as the psionic field weakened, the ground beneath them began to tremble, as if something massive was stirring beneath the surface. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said urgently, glancing around as the tremors grew stronger. "This place is coming down." But before they could move, the ground erupted with a deafening roar, and a massive, mechanical construct burst from the earth. It was unlike anything they had seen before, towering and angular, its surface covered in shifting, metallic plates that glinted in the dim light. The construct let out a low, guttural sound, like the grinding of metal on metal, and began to advance towards them, its limbs unfurling with a sinister grace. "Run," Mick shouted, grabbing Dr. Walker and pulling her towards the edge of the crater. Sarah was right behind them, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The construct moved with terrifying speed, its limbs lashing out at them with deadly precision. Mick could feel the ground shaking beneath him, the air crackling with energy as the construct's weapons powered up. They reached the edge of the crater just as the construct unleashed a barrage of energy bolts, the ground exploding in a shower of dirt and debris. Mick dove for cover, pulling Dr. Walker down with him as the bolt streaked overhead. "Sarah," he shouted, looking around frantically. "I'm here," she called back, emerging from behind a collapsed tree. She was bleeding from a gash on her forehead, but otherwise unhurt. "We need to move," Mick said, pulling her to her feet. "That thing is going to level this place." They ran through the park, the sounds of the battle echoing behind them. The construct was relentless, its massive form tearing through the trees and earth as it pursued them. But just as it seemed they were out of options, the air was filled with the roar of engines, and a squadron of military helicopters swooped in, their guns blazing. The construct was momentarily distracted, turning its attention to the new threat. "Get down," Mick shouted, dragging Sarah and Dr. Walker to the ground as the helicopters unleashed a barrage of missiles. The explosions rocked the park, and the construct staggered, its limbs flailing as it struggled to regain its balance. "We need to get out of here now," Sarah said urgently. "And their objective?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but laced with tension. "That's still unclear," the official admitted. "They've been systematically attacking infrastructure, power grids, communication networks, transportation hubs, but they've also been abducting civilians. We don't know why, but the pattern suggests they're targeting key locations, possibly to cripple our defenses." Mick exchanged a glance with Sarah. The sense of helplessness was palpable, but there was no time for despair. They were facing a threat unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, and the only option was to fight back. "We need more information," Mick said, standing. "We need to understand their tactics, their weaknesses. We can't just sit here and wait for them to pick us off." The mayor nodded. "Agreed. We're working with federal agencies to pool our resources, but time is running out. We need every available resource focused on this threat." As the meeting broke up, Mick and Sarah were approached by a woman in a lab coat, her face drawn and serious. "Detective Carter, Detective Delgado," she said, extending a hand. "Doctor, Evelyn Walker, with the CDC. I've been tasked with analyzing the biological aspect of this invasion, and I could use your help." "Biological aspect," Sarah repeated, frowning. "You mean the creatures?" "Partly, Doctor," Walker replied, lowering her voice as they walked out of the meeting room. "But there's more. We've been seeing a disturbing pattern among the civilians who've come into contact with the entities. They're experiencing symptoms that suggest some form of psychological manipulation, hallucinations, paranoia, even violent behavior." Mick's mind flashed back to the reports of people disappearing and the strange behavior near Central Park. "You think they're doing something to people's minds?" "That's one theory, Doctor," Walker said grimly. "We've seen evidence of advanced neural technology, possibly some form of mind control or psychological warfare. Whatever it is, it's spreading fast, and we don't know how to stop it." Sarah glanced at Mick, her expression dark. "So we're dealing with an enemy that can attack us from the inside out." "Exactly, Doctor," Walker said. "And we need to find a way to counter it fast. The military is focusing on the physical threat, but if we don't address this psychological component, we could lose the battle before it even begins." Mick nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "Where do we start?" "Come with me, Doctor," Walker said, leading them to a secure wing of the building. "There's something you need to see." They followed her through a series of checkpoints, eventually arriving at a heavily guarded lab. Inside, several civilians were being monitored, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. They were strapped to gurneys, surrounded by medical equipment that beeped and whirred with a sense of urgency. "We've been observing these patients since the first incident, Doctor," Walker explained, guiding them to a large observation window. "They were all in the vicinity of the Central Park event and began exhibiting symptoms shortly after." Mick studied the patients, noting their erratic movements and the way their eyes darted around the room as if they were seeing things no one else could. "What exactly are we looking at?" "Doctor," Walker hesitated, then pressed a button on the console. The room filled with the sound of distorted voices, overlapping in a chaotic chorus. The patients' mouths moved in time with the voices, but the words were incomprehensible, a jumble of languages, tones, and pitches that made Mick's skin crawl. "They've been speaking like this since they were brought in, Doctor," Walker said. "We've tried everything to understand what they're saying, but it's like they're channeling something or someone else." "Are they dangerous?" Sarah asked, her eyes fixed on the scene. "Not physically, Doctor," Walker replied, "but their mental state is deteriorating rapidly. We've tried sedatives, restraints, but nothing seems to break the connection. Whatever is happening to them, it's beyond our understanding of human biology." Mick felt a chill run down his spine. He had dealt with some of the darkest aspects of humanity in his career, but this was something else entirely, something that defied explanation. "We need to find out what's causing this, Doctor," Walker continued. "If we can understand how they're doing it, we might be able to find a way to block or reverse the effects." "Where do we even start?" Mick asked, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "That's why I need your help, Doctor," Walker said, her tone urgent. "We need to get back to the epicenter, back to Central Park. There's something there, something we missed, and it might be the key to understanding what's happening." Mick and Sarah exchanged a look, then nodded. "We're in," Mick said. "Let's get to work." As they prepared to head back into the heart of the invasion, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. The aliens were no longer just an external threat, they had infiltrated the very minds of humanity, twisting reality and sowing chaos. The fight had only just begun, and Mick knew they were up against forces that defied logic and reason. But there was no turning back. The invasion was underway, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. As they left the lab and headed back into the city, Mick steeled himself for the battles to come. The aliens were here, and they weren't just attacking the planet, they were attacking the very fabric of human consciousness. And if they couldn't find a way to stop it, there would be no escaping the darkness that had already begun to spread. The city was a battlefield. New York, once a beacon of civilization, had been plunged into chaos. The skies were a roiling mass of dark clouds, flashing with intermittent bursts of eerie, unnatural light. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the concrete canyons, punctuated by the sharp crackle of gunfire and the low, ominous hum of alien technology. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional abandoned car or overturned barricade, the remnants of a futile attempt to hold back the tide of destruction. Detective Mick Carter and his partner, Sarah Delgado, moved through the wreckage with grim determination. They had managed to evade the initial wave of attacks, but the situation was growing more desperate by the hour. The city was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, and the aliens showed no signs of stopping. The invasion had escalated far beyond anything they had anticipated. The strange lights and unidentified flying objects that had once been dismissed as anomalies were now fully revealed as the vanguard of a relentless extraterrestrial assault. The military was engaged in a losing battle against an enemy that was not only technologically superior but also ruthlessly efficient. But Mick and Sarah weren't about to give up. They had a mission: get back to Central Park, find Dr. Walker, and figure out a way to stop the psychological assault that was tearing the city apart from the inside out. As they approached the park, they could see the signs of recent combat. Burned-out vehicles and scorched earth marked the spots where humans had made their last stands, only to be overwhelmed by the sheer force of the alien attack. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and something acrid and chemical, like ozone after a lightning strike. "Keep your eyes open," Mick muttered, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The aliens were fast, silent, and deadly, and he knew they could be anywhere. Sarah nodded, her hand resting on the grip of her service pistol. "We need to find Dr. Walker and get the hell out of here. If the aliens are still in the park, we're sitting ducks." They moved cautiously through the park, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of ash and debris that covered the ground. The once lush greenery was now a charred wasteland, the trees twisted and blackened like the skeletal remains of some ancient, long-dead forest. As they neared the crater at the park's center, they spotted a group of figures huddled near the edge. Mick's heart skipped a beat as he recognized Dr. Walker among them, her white lab coat stained with soot and blood. "Dr. Walker," he called out, rushing towards her. "We need to get out of here." "Dr. Walker looked up, her face drawn and haunted. "Detective Carter, Delgado, you made it." "What's the situation?" Mick asked, glancing around nervously. The air felt charged, like the moments before a storm. "We've been studying the epicenter, Doctor," Walker said, her voice strained. "The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever is happening here, it's not just a physical phenomenon. It's affecting the minds of everyone within a certain radius." Sarah looked around, her brow furrowed. "What does that mean? Is this what's causing the hallucinations and paranoia?" Dr. Walker nodded. "It's some kind of psionic field and energy wave that interferes with neural activity. The aliens are using it to disorient us, break down our mental defenses. It's how they've been able to infiltrate so deeply, so quickly." Mick clenched his fists. "How do we stop it?" "We've been trying to find a way to disrupt the field, but it's like nothing we've ever encountered," Dr. Walker admitted. "Our equipment can't handle the level of energy. We need something more, something that can counteract the field directly." Like what Sarah asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "That's the problem, Doctor," Walker said, shaking her head. "We don't have anything like that, nothing conventional at least. But there's one possibility." Mick raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Doctor." Walker hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small metallic device. It was sleek and alien in design, with glowing symbols etched into its surface. "We found this at the crater's edge. It's some kind of alien tech. We think it might be a communications device, or maybe a control node for the field." "And you think we can use it?" Mick asked, eyeing the device warily. "It's a long shot, Doctor," Walker admitted, "but it might be our only chance. If we can reverse the signal, we might be able to disrupt the field long enough to mount a counterattack." Sarah frowned. "And how exactly do we do that?" "We've rigged up a portable generator to power it, Doctor," Walker explained. "But we need to get it close to the center of the field. The closer we are, the stronger the signal will be." Mick stared at the device, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were out of options, and time was running out. "All right," he said finally, "let's do it." They moved quickly, gathering the necessary equipment and preparing to make their way into the heart of the crater. The air grew colder and more oppressive as they approached, the psionic field pressing against their minds like an invisible weight. As they descended into the crater, the sense of disorientation grew stronger. The world seemed to blur and shift around them, the lines between reality and illusion becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish. Mick could feel his thoughts becoming muddled, memories and fears bubbling up to the surface, threatening to overwhelm him. Stay focused, he muttered to himself, gripping the alien device tightly. Just a little further.